Hi, and welcome to another episode of the MetaDev Corner. As always, I have Boro with me today.
Hi.
And today we have, again, according to us at least, a very interesting topic to discuss, which is writing, in the most general sense you can imagine, but particularly applicable to our industry, let's say. Like any sort of writing that you may find relevant to coding, writing technical documentation, using it as a learning tool, using it as a teaching tool, and so forth. So, writing. What do we have to say about writing?
Where do we start?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I would say writing is hugely important for myself as a means of communication tool.
Yeah.
So at work we usually use Slack for discussions and things like that, given the nature of the company, remote and whatnot. So probably maybe we can start there and just slowly dive into like code and documentation and the other bits we can think of in terms of writing. So I don't know. I write a lot, not just code, but also words.
No, let's start with just words. Like code is probably the easy one
here. Yeah. Start with words. Okay, that's probably the trickiest bit.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. It's complex. It's a complex topic. I want to start with that. And specifically speaking about words, obviously it depends if you are writing like in a channel or in a DM or in a group. And it depends on the relations that you have with this person, right?
All right. So we're starting with writing as a communication tool first,
right?
Right?
But you have to be careful with which words you use. So I think there is a connection.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
So if you write to somebody for the first time, you obviously have to be a little bit formal and just get yourself introduced to them. So probably be a bit careful with which words you use. So if you have some weird slang or something like you want to swear a lot or things like that,
Guilty.
First impression with somebody, or at least this is how I do it. I don't know. It's, but then, with people that I already have established relationship with, I don't pay a lot of attention to picking the right words. And I'm sure this person will understand me. Of course, we sometimes misunderstand each other, but it doesn't happen as often because we already know each other's baseline, like what we think, how we think, and what do we want to say. So I'm a bit clumsy with the words I pick. When I speak to you, for example, or with some close coworkers. So picking the right words in the sense of writing as a communication tool, English has tons of synonyms, so you have a lot of choices, but you need to make sure that you're exactly transferring the message that you
but most of those are pretty nuanced. Like sure, a synonym can mean a similar thing, but it doesn't necessarily convey the same tone of voice and all of that. So you probably have to be careful, especially when you're talking to people of different cultures, people of different backgrounds, and so forth. So you sort of have to be mindful or careful about other people's sensibilities when it comes to that.
So I mean, just like you said, there are tons of different perspectives to communication, and it's really hard. I think this is what makes it hard.
All right. So we're low-key turning this into a communication episode. I mean, like, it's probably you can't really escape that essentially, because like it's just words but in a written form, so it's ultimately ends up being about communication anyway.
And I would actually generalize the previous episodes as well. I would say that a lot of things we discussed into those have some connection with communication.
We've probably had a communication arc of episodes
so far,
like I would say that probably the previous 3 or 4 had to do with communication and like the nuances around different modes of communication in terms of like mentorship, learning, and so forth.
So all of those definitely involve communication. But I don't know, like writing is definitely, like we already established, complex. And there are many another interesting adding some additional complexity to this thing. Another interesting bit for myself is taking time zones into consideration. So when you write with somebody on Slack and you know that they will not respond until the next 12 hours, so you have to like really think of like specifically pick out the words that you want to use and what do you want to achieve by this statement, and also what do you expect to get an answer, what are the things that you're missing, because it's easy when it's real time communication, so you can just like write and get instant response, so you can be clumsy, but you have to think like really carefully. So this is something that I writing in this sense takes much time from me compared to when I do it with somebody which is closer to real time. So I get instant feedback and I don't have to put a lot of thoughts. What should I ask this person? But do I really not know this? Wait, I can actually find this out. So I'm just going to ask another question. But yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated. Sure, I mean, yeah, in terms of writing as a communication tool, I don't think I have much to add. To me, like when it comes to like chatting and so forth, it's really about who I'm talking to and what I'm trying to say ultimately. And I can probably broaden that into like two categories, possibly. One of them would be the people that I talk non-technically to, and the other category is the people that I talk tech to. That are comfortable or knowledgeable about tech. So yeah, the first category of people I find myself being more careful around, and with choice of words, it's probably bias. Like certainly it's like different people have different tolerances for swearing or whatever, like clumsy word choices and so forth. But yeah, it's probably something I have to work on. You sort of got me thinking here.
But I think beyond bias, I think like the word you used previously, I like mindfulness. Just being mindful of who is the person you're talking to, and what kind of message do you want to convey. I remember myself when I just like would learn some new trick as a teenager, and I would share this with my parents, like something around programming related, and they would just like look at me like this and
impressed.
Well, you did a really good job, but I get no feedback. So I did not really understand that they don't understand what am I saying. So yeah, being mindful and adjusting your tone in with respect to the audience. Like another example is I used to play Dota and other games, so you definitely don't speak like as if you're a programmer in those communities because it's mostly trolls there.
Yeah.
So you don't want to
have like a ton of weird slangs and inside jokes.
Yeah. So if you're the pragmatic programmer in this kind of community, you'll get burned.
Yeah. Essentially, that's very accurate.
People will over troll you. But I think don't remember of anything else other than it's really complicated, really complex topic. Maybe can move on to
let's start with like writing beyond like just chatting. I think we covered that pretty well. Let's start with technical writing. Just give me an example. What's your approach when you have to like write something technical? Let's say writing documentation.
Okay. So there are multiple ways this can go. So documentation is one way. Another way is like blog post on a developer blog, public or internal. But speaking concretely of documentation, it's hard. Again,
of course.
What's the hardest bit about writing documentation is you have to assume some kind of context for the target audience.
Yeah.
So if you let's say assume you have some kind of system that you designed and built, and you sort of want to write a documentation around it. Now this can go several different layers. Like is it architecture? Is it documentation for the onboarding purposes, or is it like tips and tricks, or how to avoid bugs, how to write tests, all of those things. But the most common thing about all of them, I would say, is you have to start somewhere and just assume some kind of context for target audience. For example, if it's a project around PHP, for the sake of example, I don't like PHP that much. I think it's a valid assumption that the reader knows PHP.
All right.
Because
of course.
you don't want to start explaining PHP in the documentation.
Yeah.
Right? It's gonna take, you have to write a lot of books.
It should be assumed, if you're trying to, let's say, document a library or something
Right.
like that, the basic assumption would be that the person that comes to with the intent to use that library at least knows the language they're using. So you have at least a common level of abstraction to be able to understand one another.
Yes. So, but languages are easy. I mean, most people tend to learn them. I think the next more complex thing is, things like, for example, concepts around HTTP, like WebSockets and all of those we just discussed prior to this talk. So if you are writing a library that somehow takes advantage of WebSockets, and the target audience is a JS developer, you don't know if they know WebSockets or not.
Oh yeah, okay.
They might know JS, and I think it's a valid assumption, but you cannot make the assumption of they know WebSockets.
So, okay, what would be fair in that case? Like, because I've been in those situations when either I document a library for somebody or I document a library that I wrote. What would be best? Do you try to explain what WebSockets are, or do you choose a resource that's, let's say authoritative on the topic, and you link to that resource?
So if it's if the target audience is somebody like me or you, who is the target audience for reading this document, it's a no-brainer, essentially, because you see the word WebSockets, you don't know it, and you just go and find out about it.
I mean, sure, but let's say you're talking to a newbie, somebody that's pretty new in the industry, knows the language,
okay,
and they're just trying to use the library
right.
you wrote.
Okay, so I guess the documentation in this case would have some kind of onboarding,
let's say,
material to it, some kind of onboarding feature into it. And of course, I mean, so if you go the hyperlink route, you mention WebSockets and you want to hyperlink, doing this, I see most people do it with Wikipedia, but Wikipedia has some really good examples, but not all of the articles.
But it's mostly, usually it's not really technical. It's just like a very broad strokes, conceptual explanations. They don't really drill down into details and a lot of examples. So we'll have to pick something else. Let's say something like MDN, for example.
Yeah, but I guess all of those mediums are accepted in the proper context, and I'm struggling to find the best one, because I keep thinking about this other aspect, which is different people learn differently.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I learned by writing a quick, small proof of concept example and get a feel by it. Okay, I understand this now, So I learned by writing, which is to say, but if I definitely understand people who learn by reading more, and whether, so now you get into the do they understand by reading, if there are more diagrams or maybe some kind of visualization, or should it be just text or some snippets of code? So this can go like tons of ways, and I don't know of the best way, unfortunately. I if I knew that, I would probably be a millionaire by now.
Yeah, no, like there are even frameworks for writing docs. I don't know if you've heard of some. One of my favorite ones is called Diataxis. It's French. I can't really pronounce it properly, so please nobody get angry. And I've had some really, really interesting results and successes by using that framework. It usually comes with a couple of different flavors of documentation. It splits into how-tos, tutorials, and I don't remember the other two, because how-tos and tutorials are the most common ones I've used. And this summer I had the chance of documenting a project that haven't been documented in any sense of the word. There was a readme with use npm install and have fun, basically. It amounted to that. But I was supposed to document it and make the next batch of developers that came to that project their lives were supposed to be easier after that. So I used that axis, and actually everybody was pretty happy after that. They had a very easy time understanding the quirks and the weird corners of that project, and it was a pretty big project. And my point is like there are tools that can help you with
Okay.
thinking about documentation.
How did the tool help you? Did it like provide some? I have not used this tool, so like, did it provide some hints or
Structure.
so it adds structure?
Yeah, it tells you that okay, you need these kinds of writing, basically these kinds of, let's call them articles, because like that's probably the most general term I can use here for them.
Okay.
And the purpose of, let's say, a tutorial is, sort of a more broad stroke overview of a certain concept.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of using a how-to is a more hands-on example and a more detailed guide for a certain feature. And those are usually shorter, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Follow the steps, get
so you
a
get
result.
like a template from this tool, and
not
you just
a template, more like a guide, but it's a very well explained guide, is what I'm trying to say. And once you structure your documents in folders, like let's say you have a tutorial for using the telemetry library. And then you have a short article that explains some of the quirks of that telemetry library. And that article is linked in the tutorial that we have before. So it's sort of interlinked. It gives you a structure and it makes your life easier and the user's lives easier as a result. Because they have an index and they have like a more guided way with going through the documentation, finding the exact information thereafter.
Yeah, and I guess I like this structure. I think it's a great idea. But going back to the previous question, like which approach is the best? I guess you can start with something like this and then just add some kind of feedback, sort of small form at the end of each article. Was it useful? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yeah.
And depending on the audience, you can get a sense of whether tutorials are best for newbies, for example, or design docs are best for seniors, or RFCs are best for deriving a new project or something like that.
Yeah, you can probably like have some structure around the technical writing. That usually helps. At least it helps me. And like I said, I've had some good results. So that's probably the approach I'm going to be using from now on. Now, again, caveat, this approach is applicable to, let's say, bigger projects. Smaller stuff like if I'm building an integration for Astro, which is my favorite sport these days, technically speaking. Or I'm trying to build a small utility library for post classification, which I did recently as well. I don't see the point of writing something by using something heavy like the axis. You can just get away with README and examples.
And developer MD.
Yeah. I mean, sure, but basically, if you give broad strokes explanation in the README, this is the library, this is what it's trying to achieve. Have a roadmap at the end that you probably want to build something more out of it and continue solving that problem space, providing simpler APIs for similar problems and so forth, and provide some practical examples. That should already be enough, or like cover, let's say, 80% of the cases that people might be after.
Yeah, I agree. With projects of smaller complexity, but then again, there is a project like FFmpeg, which is
that's
last time we checked, we worked on it together, like maybe more than 10 years ago. It had like literally zero documentation. So
there were man pages.
Yeah, but I remember ended up digging mostly through the code,
and weird examples on the internet.
Yeah, Stack Overflow and all of those. But
we didn't have ChatGPT back then. We're old, man.
Oh yeah, the mountains we had to climb.
Uphill both ways.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else in regards to documentation? Trying to think.
I don't think so. Like beyond like keeping it simple and keeping it understandable, I don't think I have any other tips in regards to docs.
What should a developer do if they just like clone a project, they want to understand it, but there is zero documentation? Let's say FFmpeg is
Uno reverse. Okay. Well,
in your opinion, I mean, it's a hard question.
It depends. My first reflex is to start digging through the code. Like start digging through methods.
But this is so time consuming,
It is, but sometimes you don't have a choice. And the thing you can do is actually document it while you're exploring, so that the next person doesn't have to go through, that particular mountain.
But there is, this is the trick. PHP source, the source code for PHP is also written in C, like FFmpeg, and very small to zero documentation. But as you learn things, okay, so you have some target goal in your mind, right? Want to write something in PHP source. You want to fix a bug or whatever. So as you do that, as you are basically seeing, okay, I don't understand this, and you are quickly learning and try to reach your target goal as soon as possible. Maybe manager pressure or something, or some other interesting incentive. But then, when you reach your target goal, you just finish it and you're like, okay, I'm done with this. So what, if you don't have time to write the documentation, then it's time that you wasted, and you will probably waste again in a couple of months from now if you have to go back and do it again for some reason. But also time wasted for other people. So I guess cooperation comes to mind here.
Yeah.
You can be cooperative a bit by sacrificing small for a short amount your target goal, I guess.
You see, the language is interesting there. You're talking about sacrificing. And I'm thinking of that as, a productively spent time. And I have argued with people about this one in particular.
I mentioned sacrifice because you will have to, go back to your manager and say, well, I spent 10 extra hours on this because I wrote this documentation. And, if the manager likes documentation, he or she will be fine with it. But if not, you probably get a hard time about it.
Yeah, sure. But they should be, wise enough to know that the next person that has to deal with that particular crap, has a significantly easy time when they come and try to do that.
I would agree with you that would be a wise manager. Okay.
So, we're not discussing managers here. I'm not sure if we ever will, to be honest. It's not one of my favorite topics.
Oh, it was just as an example for the sake of the argument.
Yeah, but it's really about whether a person sees value in saving time down the line. And I'm not, talking about this nebulous, weird corners. Let's try optimizing this for weird reasons and spend 20 extra hours so that we're scalable later. I'm not talking about that. Those things are mostly pointless, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
But this is measurable. If, let's say, you have a team that has the misfortune of having to deal with PHP source at certain times, it would be to everybody's benefit to dig in a certain place and not just leave it like it is. Just document at least keep some notes.
Mm-hmm.
So there is this weird method here that leaks memory when you try to do this. Leave them dragons be here notes at least, so that they know they
don't fall into the trap.
Yeah, exactly. You already did that, and anybody that's, let's say, a reasonable person, it doesn't necessarily have to be a manager, would certainly agree that just leaving a note over there so that the next person doesn't screw up is the wise thing to do here.
I agree with all that, but I think the question that comes to my mind is, which is more important, writing code or writing documentation?
Oh boy, we're getting
both is the easiest answer, by the way.
Is it okay? Let's go a bit more meta here.
Yeah,
we are writing code for two reasons: human understanding and problem automation, problem solving, right?
solving a particular task.
The second thing here, the second half of that is not that interesting, because that thing runs through a machine. Something happens on the other end. The machine doesn't care how it's written. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of that story, however, are people.
Customers.
No, developers.
Oh, developers.
People
Okay.
that actually write that software.
Mm-hmm.
People that would actually have to come back 3 months later
and maintain it.
and come back to maybe some weird recursion that you can't even read properly without spending 2 hours or something like that. Again, guilty. I've done some really dumb shit back in my day. So what about that? Like, do you think that spending some time, let's say spending an extra hour documenting some weird recursion or something like that, so that the next person that comes along spends like a total of 15 minutes opposed to an hour to add something small over there, is that worth it? Is that time well invested time?
It is, but you know what's even I guess the biggest problem here is that obviously we cannot predict the future. So sometimes we write code and we think this nobody will ever use this. So I'll just leave it at it, or it will be only used in the single place. So we'll just leave it there and let it be. I won't have to ever maintain this. Oh, so this is a mistake I've been doing.
Famous last words. Yeah.
I think every developer is well intentioned. I mean, if somebody can convince them that they need to do this, they will accept the argument and do it. So, but nobody can predict the future. And so, just as a quick example, let's say you're writing a library and you want to be, easy to be used and whatever. So you spend tons of time documenting it. And obviously the code has to be there already. So you spend another ton of time. And then nobody uses the library, right? So now you fell into the trap. Well, okay, maybe you learned, you improved your skills by doing all of those things, but there is really no value. So I think determining the value is probably the trickiest bit in, when we want to compare code and documentation.
Sure, but it's in a similar vein. We could probably make the same argument about testing.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That's a hot topic unto itself,
for sure,
of course, but as testing is considered a good engineering practice, documentation should be considered the same amount of a good engineering practice, if not better. Because sometimes there are projects that are well documented that lack tests.
Right.
Like the reverse is not that much of a common occurrence, at least to my experience, but good documentation can really save your ass. And can save you a ton of time, and just in my opinion, it's just worth it. So just to answer your original question, doing both, yes, of course, but spend at least 20% of your working time doing documentation, I would say.
Especially if it's for things that you already kind of bump into
a
couple of times.
Absolutely.
So if you identify it as a trap, help out your coworkers.
Exactly, like help out your people. You work in a team, you work as a team, and you basically want everybody to be productive. So that time investment, makes for a more productive experience for everybody involved.
How much?
No-brainer.
How much structure do you think all of this should have? So let me give some context here. Assume you have a huge repository with tons of pull requests, tons of issues, and some bug occurred, you fix it, you explain it in the pull request, in the commits, messages, whatever. And now, do you have like a separate documentation tool that links to this? Or do you just expect, well, everything is in there, go search the issues /PRs?
No.
How much of a structure would you prefer versus, okay, this is chaos, all the info is there, but it's on you to find it?
It's, if you fixed it or you built it, you get to document it. And I don't mean I don't consider GitHub discussions or GitHub issue discussions documentation. No. You get to write that in a markdown file at least. And for real, you wrote a new method, fucking document that thing. It's on you because you wrote it, you understand it best. And in order for that knowledge to be transferred properly to other people, you're the authority that needs to write that. I can certainly help you with how to write that documentation. We can even go through a peer review process about, what are the proper ways of writing about code and documenting everything. That's fine, that's cool, but you get to document it.
Okay. All of this is, by the way, under the assumption that knowledge has to be transferred.
Yeah, of course.
Because if it doesn't, you might as well not document it.
Yeah, sure, but how often does that happen? And consider this, there is a case where you get to transfer the knowledge to yourself. Our brains are not perfect. You have to document it for yourself down the line. had the infinite wisdom of writing some really smart code at times, which I would have, loved to have documentation for when I came back to that code, but I didn't. So, I spent like copious amounts of time understanding what I was trying to be smart about. And don't be smart about code. That's the lesson here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody does that mistake. I remember myself obfuscating code, trying to look smarter. But
yeah, exactly.
It really was the only one that harmed was myself.
Exactly.
So, write clean and readable code. And I mean, that's another whole discussion.
No, that's like, but it goes hand in hand with this topic. Like, writing understandable code is writing. So, but we can get to that a bit later. Yeah, so I think we covered documentation well enough.
Right. We mentioned types of docs like tutorials,
how-tos, guides.
RFC can go there.
RFCs are, I wouldn't call them strictly documentation as much as I would call them specs. But
there is a documentation, could be documentation aspect to those.
You could derive documentation from RFCs.
That's the other thing. How do we define documentation? So, I mean, it's maybe we don't have to spend time on that, but I think, a lot of things can be considered documentation.
A user manual. Let's say if it can be considered a user manual, then it's documentation.
Mm-hmm.
An RFC is not exactly a user manual. An RFC is something that tells you how to build a certain thing, not how to use it.
If we go judging strictly by the definition of RFC, which is request for comments.
I'm being too literal here, yeah.
They have been used for spec, but I think specs is like the last kind of, that's the goal.
Yeah.
But before they get to specs, it's literally RFC, requesting for comments. So I think it's mostly like, just let's discuss people here. So it's like a Slack channel. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a Slack channel in the form of a PDF or something.
Yeah, something like that. But I guess as it converges towards its goal, less and less comments are retrieved, and then it slowly becomes spec doc, I guess. But I wouldn't say it's like a specs doc even in the beginning, because it's weird to me because it's also called an RFC. Like we have the RFC standards. It's still request for comments, but we consider them as, in my mind, standards are something like, okay, this is set in stone.
Yeah.
This is how it's going to work and it's never changed. But why do you still request for comments?
I mean, maybe it's tradition. It came into software from a very different place. And, the rules in those places are different. So, and we discussed it in a previous episode already. So we don't really have to get too deep into it, but sure. Yeah. But in general, like, I would like to close the documentation part with like, write your docs. Like, it's your responsibility. I know sometimes it can get really, really boring. I know, wait. I really sympathize with that. I wrote a ton of documentation already. And it does get boring. It does get repetitive, but if you built it, it's your responsibility to document it at least, so that you make your life easier and the life for the person that uses it easier.
Yep. Totally agree on that.
Cool. So next up, writing in a more informal fashion. Let's say writing blogs or using writing as a learning tool.
Is there an English word for turlitava? Do you know? Maybe...
I don't think there is. Like, there might be a French one, but I don't think there is an English one.
Okay, so I'll try to come up with something similar to that. Like, imagine a stew with a lot of vegetables mixed into that and some kind of stuff. So it's basically everything inside of it.
Oh yeah, you can use, like, there's this English word, and I think I'm using it probably, hodgepodge of everything.
Right, something like that. So speaking of blogs, this is basically my blog.
Yeah.
The reason why it's because I'm using my blog to transfer the knowledge that I use to the public. And you will find posts like that assume ton of context.
Yep.
And then you will find posts that assume zero context. And this, by the way, all comes from me. So if I'm, completely literate about a particular topic, I would start from the scratch and explain it on the blog post. But if it's, something around, I don't know, Haskell comes to my mind for some reason, which I'm, already have some kind of some amount of years working with it. I would just like start from somewhere in the middle. So that's the way I use my blog. Basically, just share my thoughts to the public, which is a very can be a very chaotic thing to do.
Yeah, it's my blog as well. I think in general, whenever I write like posts either for myself or like other publications or whatever, like maybe 90% of those have to do with, hey, I learned about this, I find it interesting, that's why I'm writing about it.
Right.
And most often it's about a thing I built or a thing about experimented with.
Yeah, I'm the same.
So it's this either like, let's say, tutorial styles that you can, if you follow along, you get a usable application at the end, or a usable library utility, something like that. The other kinds of posts I write are more conceptual and have to do with, let's say, summarizing something I realized or learned, or something based on experience, and something that I've realized with, let's say, X years of doing something.
Yeah.
I have something to say and I'm saying that, sort of like using my blog as a soapbox stage. And so yeah, those are the two types of writing I see, both either as learning tools or as summary tools. Everything else is secondary. Like there's like the promotion part, like self-promotion. You share certain stuff on social media, whatever. Some people may find it valuable, some may not, which is fine. Not every writing in the world is interesting or interesting to everybody. So yeah, what about you?
I have those two topics. I was thinking about it while you were describing, and more recently, I also started writing some reflection posts. I have a bunch, not many, too much of those, but a bunch of those where I just like what, and I think it closely relates to the one you mentioned already, summarizing your thoughts about thing you learned. But it's someone falling more on the reflection side of things where, oh, wait, I figure out I'm thinking more about this particular problem in this way. So it's a bit philosophical. And the other part, the other one, which I really like, is book summaries.
Right.
So the way my brain works is, I would read a book. If it's a technical one, then that's fine. But if it's a non-technical, would read it and then we'll probably forget most of it in a couple of in a couple of months. So I started writing book summaries, like short summaries on my blog post, and the process is I read a book, write the summary, and then keep iterating, reading the summary, in the weeks that come. And in this way, concepts get they get wired to my brain easily.
You get to internalize them after a couple of repetitions, and you sort of extract the really useful and general ideas.
So it's and it's found it very useful for topics like that I have literally no knowledge. If it's like a technical book about programming language or whatever, you can make the analogy and in JS it's I don't know, parentheses, in Python it's lambda or something like that. So it's very easy, but for like I guess those two categories in additional. Interesting that you mentioned promotion. I've been sharing my blog posts here and there, but I don't know. I understand the value, but in my use case, the audience was always on the in the second spot. This is because the blog itself has a very selfish reason, which is, it's me who is doing the learning, and I want to share this with the wider audience. And I choose the form deliberately. I don't want to impose any structure to myself. If you don't know something, then it's on you to figure out if you want to know, if you want to understand the post or whatever. But that's the way I use my blog. Actually, I don't know. It has its trade-offs. It's not the best way to do blogging for sure, but mostly as a learning tool to summarize.
Yeah, same. Secondary as everything else, but primarily as like
right.
a learning tool and making sure that I understand something well enough so that I can write about it. It's very similar to speaking in that way. And we discussed it already. Like, this may be a different mode of content creation, but ultimately it comes down to the same thing. Like, you can speak or write about the thing if you properly understand it only, not before that. But because like if you try to create content for something that you're in the process of learning, it might come off as amateurish, it might come off as like, not baked enough and so forth. And I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. Certainly no content is perfect, but still, I think we're doing our best with that.
And I mean, besides that, so sometimes writing should be serious. Like, wrote a couple of blog posts for the WordPress.com developer blog, and now you have to work under constraints. My blog, I have the whole freedom that I want, and I can write anything there. But in this, you have to be careful on the tone and the target audience. You can assume on a WordPress blog post that people know about WordPress and they know how to develop it, but you still have to like explain some of the concepts. And it's very context dependent. It's similar to public speaking, like what you said, but also it depends when you write the post.
Yeah. So I have this interesting question, since you mentioned audience. Like 2.5 years ago, it was something like that. I was on an interview for a developer position. And one of the questions, I didn't get the job. It was a really like sort of tough crowd sort of thing, doesn't matter. But one of the questions I got was, who's your audience for the blog? Like, I started mentioning like...
For a developer blog?
Yes, for my own blog. And I got...
for your own personal. Yeah, okay.
The interviewer asked me something about, okay, what's your most common method of content creation and why? And I started explaining myself and why I'm doing it and so forth. And then like she cuts me middle sentence. So who's your audience? Like, okay, that's a very interesting question. So that in retrospect, that would have been the good answer, certainly, because like primarily I'm doing it for myself, but I didn't think of it like that back then. I thought of it like, who's the person that would find this interesting? So like, let's say people that like experimenting, people that like playing around with new experimental APIs, newer technologies that are primarily in the front-end web space and stuff like that. But that's sort of general. Answering with something like for myself would have been the superior answer here, for sure.
But I don't know, it's I always saw it like a playground where you just like do whatever.
Yeah.
Obviously, in this setup with MetaDev, we have like a specific amount of freedom, but we can't just talk about anything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can, but
would it be interesting? Probably not.
Right. So, you always have to, if you want, people can start like 10 different blog sites, and each of those can have like a specific purpose.
Yeah.
And you can set the constraints yourself, impose them on yourself, and okay, today I want to write poems, so I'll just go over to this blog post, and then today I will talk about code, so I'll go to that blog. And all of these spaces can sort of allow you to categorize those. But in my case, like I said, this stew with a lot of vegetables into that.
So, okay, like, let's switch to something else. Like, this is a good closer question, but I'm going to ask it now. So, how important is writing for developers? And I don't mean writing code. I mean, like, everything else that has to do with writing.
Why not writing code?
I mean, we'll discuss writing code, but let's discuss
so the question is, okay. Yes. The one thing that my blog gave to me is more clarity in thinking. And there is this quote, I don't remember names, so sorry, but it went something along the lines of, writing is nature's way of showing how sloppy our thinking is. So
that's wise.
This is what I feel. As soon as I write something, I feel like, okay, now it's really crystallized in my head, and I'm just like, I have a good grasp of this. Yeah. So beyond, so that's obviously, knowledge and learning. So beyond that, improved communication skills And if we go by those, I would say very important.
Cool.
What's your answer?
I agree. I would say that it's even necessary because, like, for especially for the more introverted crowd among us, and that's statistically significant, let's say. It gives you a way to express yourself and to understand yourself that more extroverted people achieve by being extroverted. It allows you for this, let's say, mirror sort of thing, like a way of structuring your thoughts and all of that in a way that you would have to like sit down and read what you're writing after that, sort of like a mirror. And it's really worth it. Like, first, as a communication tool, or improving your communication tool, understanding what's important to say, filtering important information from less important information, and that there's a lot of value in that.
Yep.
And lastly, a learning tool. So, as I said, like, you can really know that you understand something, that you've learned something, once you create something with it, whether it's like application, blog posts, both, talks, video content, whatever. But ultimately, like, I love repeating that favorite quote of mine: content creation is the final step of a learning process. I really love that quote.
I love that one as well. You shared it with me, and the first time I heard it, it's definitely a powerful quote.
Yeah. So yeah, it's certainly like probably one of the most important things you can learn, and the most valuable things you can learn in your career as a developer, for sure. So okay, the final thing that we didn't cover was code itself. So
why did we leave code for last?
I don't know, man. That's the obvious one. Let's say most of our time writing is spent writing code.
Right.
As developers. I mean, nowadays that's not the case for myself and probably for you, but...
So why is it that code is obvious but not the other bits we discussed? So I feel like code is everywhere, but these other bits are just like hidden in some kind of caves that you have to search for yourself,
It's probably conditioning. I mean, our primary function, at least up until recently, was you need to produce code that solves problems, right? So that's why I probably consider it obvious, because I imagine most of our audience is technical and most of our audience does some coding.
Yeah, and actually you and I we discussed this on some of the topics. You and I have a very similar career path, so I would say that's exactly the same reason for myself.
Yeah.
The only expectation was go write code.
Yeah, pretty much. Solve a problem, write code, whatever, like in any, like on any end of that spectrum, like whether you were expected to be a problem solver or a code monkey, like, or on any end of that spectrum, that was the expectation ultimately. You get to express yourself via code. That was the expectation. That's it.
Was it you that changed this expectation or your employer?
Oh, well, I never...
This is a philosophical question, by the way.
But that's a really, really long discussion. I
can summarize it. I have a quick answer for myself.
For me personally, it was sort of a gradual process. I never really was, maybe at the start of my career, just, the person that just codes. I never really did just that. So it was sort of a gradual transition, let's say. And the more time passed and the more seniority I got, I became freer with those statements. I see value in doing this. We should do that because of reason X, Y, Z.
But it came from you in the first place.
Yes.
I mean, the first trigger, sort of.
I suppose, yes. Especially, it probably depends on the working environment. With the working environment and companies I've worked with, I sort of had to make a case, usually. We started in one of the companies I'm working with. They were, they had the perspective that starting a developer advocacy program was a good thing to do. And they had reasons for doing that, and it proved very useful for everybody involved, especially for the developers that need mentoring and guidance and whatever. It paid dividends in the end. But in order for that to happen, it's not just you can make all the, you can be as persuasive as, I don't know, like I can't really remember an example of somebody that's a persuasive person. It doesn't matter if there is pushback from the other side, from the management and everybody else. So it's probably a longer discussion for a different episode that we're like.
Yeah, I don't know. For me, very quickly, it was, kind of like I got here by go with the flow kind of deal. When somebody mentioned it to me for the first time, and it's not a single person, by the way. You are among those persons with respect to public speaking. But with other things like creating a book out of the blog post, or working on DevX at Automatic, all of those things came sort of as they came, and I'm like, well, actually, I see a lot of value in this. So I would, I would definitely be up for that. And this is what happened with the first second Beer.js, or when I got a ping from A-Press about the books or whatever. It's like, well, why not convert my blog posts? It's a really good idea, just go do it.
Exactly.
So I feel like this sort of kind of like very Zen Chinese. I've just, the river takes me somewhere, so it's funny. But we can go to code now, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Like, so what is well written code?
Oof.
This can be biased as hell.
I mean,
just your take on it.
There are a lot of answers to this question. One answer that I particularly like is no code, and it's very philosophical. I don't think it's a good answer because it's not pragmatic. It doesn't give a lot.
You might have a career as a Zen priest.
But I don't know, on a more pragmatic answer, a clean and good written code always depends on the context. So if you are working at a company who, in a company that you already know their culture, their developers and whatever, how they think, whether it's a JS, mainly JS driven culture, or Ruby or R, Python, whatever it is. So you just have to adjust to this, right? And what they consider to be clean code.
Yeah.
That's... if they want to use Python with a lot of decorators, and if they think this is clean code and they have the justification for that, you have the option to agree or disagree with this justification. And if you disagree, you better prepare yourself to give a good argument why decorators are bad. But if you agree, you just do it, and everybody in the company will consider it clean code. That's more pragmatic. Going back to the philosophical, no code is, most people nowadays, most senior people, I should say, tend to not want to rewrite things. So just if there is something I can reuse, just reuse. And I think there is a lot of value in that, because you're basically taking, like a complete package, and you're solving the problem considering the trade-offs. So, if I have to pay $10 per month for some service that will solve my customers' problems, but if I need, $10,000 and 3 months of development to implement this service myself, you have to consider trade-offs. So in some cases, no code can be best, the cleanest and the best code. But in other cases, depending on what we want to solve, even the ugly code can be considered clean code, depending on what we are optimizing for.
Yeah, exactly.
Solving the customer's problem, or making our developers happy, or making our developers feel more nerdy.
It's a loaded question.
Yeah,
and probably.
And now back at you, actually.
Sure, like two things I would say. Like the first thing is like keep it consistent, even if it's like ugly according to my own personal sensibilities.
Oh no.
Keep it consistent.
Consistency 100.
Because like
very important.
In order to get somebody new on a project, it would have to be consistent. I mean, get them up to speed on a project quickly.
Yes.
Like without spending like copious amounts of time explaining your weird decisions. Keep it consistent, even if it's ugly. And the second thing is like, don't make me work for it. I already mentioned this. Like, if,
right.
Let's say if we're doing a Next.js project or something like that, Um, Next.js comes with a certain set of practices that are considered good. I don't necessarily agree with all of them,
Right.
but you come with certain expectations when you're starting a Next.js project. Don't make me work with a different set of expectations. Like, I realize that some nuance is okay here, like you can change certain thing to a class opposed to function, or like run a certain thing on a server instead of running it on the client. That's fine, but in general, don't make me think about a router that lives in a different folder than what 99% of us expect about the location of that router. And I've had that recently. That's why I'm really salty about this one. So it's things like that. Don't make me work for it, and keep it consistent.
And I think those 2 points actually, I totally agree with those. And I think those two have a really good consequence, that they make the code more predictable. So even if you have in Next.js or React or whatever weird design decisions that you disagree with, it still makes the code easily predictable. So if you see weird design, let's name it A, used in several places, it will, if it's consistent, it will behave exactly the same in a weird way, and you can easily predict it. So I think, that's a very good call. Write code that is predictable. I love that.
So, like, probably as a closer already, like, what would be the best way to improve your already existing coding practices towards more readable code, more understandable code, code that's, let's say you're trying to explain a concept via blog post, right? It's complex and you're trying to simplify it, and you're trying to make it easily accessible to some audience, right? Apply the same to code. What are your tips and advice?
It's another loaded question, like every question. The one thing that comes to my mind is obviously which programming language are we talking about? Because there are many programming paradigms.
Okay, yeah, let's pick your favorite one.
Dennis Ritchie said something along the lines of writing is the best way to learn a programming language.
Absolutely.
So, if I were to pick one, I don't know. I guess I would say learn as many programming paradigms as you can. Write code, even if it's ugly, even if it's bad, even if it's throwaway, because that's the only way you can improve. And only after that can you actually start thinking about this is more as a where to start. So having said that, the next step after that would be consistency comes back to mind, and what I shared earlier as well. Try to be beyond adjusting to the code base. Try to see what kind of changes you can make into that. So if you really want to introduce a new design abstraction or a new service into the whole system, even in one programming, in the same programming language or a different one, try to think about the trade-offs, like what gets you this, and then if you can do that, then you can actually start working on the code bits. I know this is a very high level answer, but you can start working on the code bits, and after this point, you can sort of navigate the whole abstractions in the code base and things like that, and hopefully get a good grasp of the code that is already there. It's I don't know if I can go a lower level than this. It's a very tricky question. I mean, maybe we can try to like put some context around it,
maybe.
Or if you have some other answers, would love to connect.
Not really. Like, I have sort of a more practical advice. Let's say iterating groups, like iterating groups, basically, like write the dumbest and the most unstructured code you can, but do it in a group, and ideally have somebody more senior around.
I have done this in pair programming sessions, but not in groups, actually.
Even in groups, it's similar, actually. It gets more chaotic at times, but it's fine. Like, there are these mob programming ideas and whatever. I don't really subscribe that much to those, but actually having a group in which you can, bounce your ideas with different people already informs you significantly better than just doing the thing yourself. And like, yeah, doing different programming paradigms and languages and everything helps, but ultimately you're writing the code for people to understand. Getting people's feedback is probably what would make you a writer of more readable code in general.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing we didn't touch is code comments.
Yeah, well, I would say that you can probably put them in the same camp as documentation. They would probably comments are not documentation, don't get me wrong, but you can apply similar rules to them. Like the purpose of them, if the documentation is like a general overview of, let's say, a code-based function, whatever you're trying to document, a comment might be an explanation of a smaller unit of computation, a single line of code or something. So similar rules apply. Like in many senses, you can apply the same ideas to stuff like, let's say, the commenting system. I don't remember what it was that actually added types to JavaScript. Like the idea escapes me currently. There's TypeScript, and there's this thing that you can. I probably know which one.
I vaguely remember. I don't know. Flow.js comes to mind.
No, Flow died like a while ago already. No, this was different. No, it's not a linter.
Is it like something like PHP-CS, which takes comments and runs some checks?
No, it can produce documentation.
Oh, okay,
for
okay.
A certain function, method, whatever line of code, but it can also be used sort of as a type checker in a similar way TypeScript can be used as a type checker. I forgot the name. So yeah, like I said, similar rules there.
Yeah. I guess having said, okay, so programming paradigms, and then try to introduce new concepts, even though they might be wrong or right, which is fine. It's still a learning thing. And what you said about group, I think those are pretty good summaries. I can't think of any more other than what Dennis Ritchie said. Just go and do and write it,
I mean, it's Dennis Ritchie. Like, he can't be wrong, man. Like, trust Dennis Ritchie. He was a smart guy, for sure. And most people at Bell Labs anyway, but, that's a different topic anyway. So, cool. So, let's close this with an interesting question. What's your current favorite programming language?
PHP. I have not had a favorite programming language for some time, actually, since I implemented my own a couple of years, like 1 or 2 years ago. I still play with Haskell every now and then, and my go-to languages are, I write a lot of PHP actually, besides joking about it, some JS and some Python. So those used on a daily basis, I would not consider them interesting. But I don't know, Haskell is still tackling some Lisp racket scheme.
Yep.
What else? I did not actually attend Advent of Code this year, but I did do one last year. I did each puzzle in its own language, and I think the one
that's fantastic.
The one I had most fun with was assembly. I think I used NASM, NetWide Assembler. It was fun for personal reasons because it took me back to my teenager years. And the other one, which I found very weird, but it kind of solved the problem, was LaTeX. So I don't know, I always play around with different paradigms and try to solve the same problem in different paradigms. And there are insights always.
Yeah.
So it just makes you think in a different way, sort of, curve your perspectives in a good way.
Yeah, of course. Widen your horizons.
Yeah. Whatever. Turkish Airlines. What about yourself? Curious for the answer.
I'm back to answering with Common Lisp. With that one, like it's strange. Like I started Advent of Code with Common Lisp. I didn't really finish it because I didn't have enough time to invest in there. And towards the end, it was the holidays and like just couldn't be bothered. I just wanted to play Baldur's Gate. But yeah, I would say Common Lisp. It made me realize when I started doing Advent of Code, like how rusty I am with the thing. Like, so, you get to screw something up and suddenly you write weird loops that don't make sense. And like, after a couple of iterations, it starts clicking again.
Yep.
And you start writing again, and it's really interesting. So I'm sort of looking forward of writing some kind of a toy project with Common Lisp soon, I hope.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, to me, the Lisps are in general very, the one thing I really like about them is the minimalism part.
Yeah.
Just like so few constructs, and you are on your own, go build the world.
Yeah, exactly. Here's your like very, very basic language constructs, if you can call them that. You have a macro system if you like it, but don't use it. It's you don't have to use it for real.
And there can be actually no bloat in Lisps. The bloat can come from the author of the program, but unlike, I think PHP is a very bloated language. I don't want to get too deep into the topic, but you don't get this kind of thing with Lisp because it's so small. And what was it? I think 4 or 5. I don't know if I'll remember, like car, Calder, Lambda, Evil. And you only have like these 4 or 5 concepts, and that's all you need basically. So
yeah, and I mean, like, you could probably make that case for most programming languages out there.
I think most of them converge to bloat, and by bloat I mean really just
sugar on top of sugar.
Yeah.
Sugar, and like but that's a different discussion unto itself.
It is.
At which point sugar becomes bloat?
So this is my definition of bloat. It can be wrong, but if you already have constructs in the language that allow you to do what the sugar does, and the only thing that sugar does is improve the syntax, I consider that bloat.
Then, like, JavaScript is a very bloated language by your definition as well.
PHP is very bloated.
Yeah. But there's a reason for that bloat. It's usually like user developer pressure, like the developers that use the language. Let's say they come from different backgrounds, they come from different languages, and they come with different expectations. So classes in JavaScript, in my opinion, weren't really necessary to begin with.
Yes,
but people wanted them, and like, you can't argue with that. If people understand, can write better code according to them using classes, like, just give people classes. Arguably, they made a very weird implementation of classes to begin with, but that's a different topic.
So you have functions and you have JSON objects. Why do you need classes?
Yes.
What does this buy for the developer? I'm not asking. This is a rhetorical question, I'm making the case for Lisp.
There is an answer to that rhetorical question. The thing is that a thinking tool, a simpler thinking tool for a person that comes, let's say, from a .NET background or from a Java background, like, because they have been conditioned to think in classes, and they're trying to sort of, transfer that knowledge and model of thinking to a new language. For them, it makes sense. For us, it might not, but it doesn't matter. It's about user/developer experience. And
right, but I don't know, all of those things like trigger, they have consequences. So, I remember the React class-based versus functional components. So, and you will have, so you added this construct to the language, which will, spill over all of the frameworks and whatnot. So, and I don't even know what they use nowadays with React. I think it's people mostly rely on functional components.
Like, it's not just, you can write classes if you're so inclined, but I think that people that do are really in the minority. So, like, most of us, or well, not me personally, I'm not really doing that much React anymore, just use functions. And, which is sort of the JavaScript way, which is, I'm going to get sarcastic, I don't want to do that, so yeah.
I think JS will get back to being a Lisp eventually. It used to be a very good Lisp in the beginning, in my opinion, but
it never stopped being one. That's the thing, like, the Lisp things about it are still there. You can still write it.
Right, yeah.
Like, there's this interesting, like, Douglas Crockford did an interview, like, recently, and he said something along the lines, We should do better than JavaScript. Like,
What did he have in mind by saying that?
he didn't. He said like something like along the lines, people still write programming languages, but nobody cares about new programming languages. It's sort of like the interest crystallized, let's say. Like it sort of got a bit more rigid. Whenever we see something new, it's
So JS is stuck, basically. He's arguing against that.
Essentially stuck with JS, and he's arguing against like us, getting stuck on languages in general. Like maybe we should experiment or whatever. I can see like value in that line of thinking, sure, but I don't feel like JS for better or worse is going anywhere soon. So
I mean, at least it's not
TypeScript by extension, of course.
Yeah, it's not productive, at least. I mean, imagine like the whole world of software developers just having to learn a new programming language. For some it will be very easy, for others it will be like huge mindset shift.
I'm not opposed to it, but you have to consider that changing an entire language usually comes with a bunch of opportunity cost on top of that. You suddenly lose an entire ecosystem. Yep. Sometimes it might work, there are like cross compilers, importers, foreign language interfaces, whatever, that may be able to work with an existing ecosystem, sure, but I don't think it's going to be that simple if we just switch to, let's say, something like Zig opposed to just using JavaScript. So
Rust seems to have taken some, but I don't know where it's going.
It's still pretty niche. Like it's great for certain use cases, and it's being used for those use cases, but like outside of that, no, currently I don't see it. Like I don't see it replacing me writing UI code.
Yeah, no, I think mostly. So I'm following a bunch of Haskell folks on Twitter, and I think the divide is greatest there. A lot of Haskellers tend to move either to Rust, or I think OCaml is another popular.
You could probably say that that's Haskell's fault. Like they're being a bit too dogmatic and idealistic for, Haskell to remain, a real world option, let's say.
Yeah,
That's really just another political discussion, for sure. All right. So we're done here for today.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of stuff, and nothing comes to mind for now.
Yep, we're good. So thanks for listening. Catch you in the next one. Peace out.
Thanks, folks.